The interesting thing about evil is people who commit it do not often think of it as evil. Other people think of it as evil. Ceausescu and Pol Pot and Mao Zedong and Hitler and Stalin, they are responsible in the last century for killing millions and millions of people, but they did not think that they were doing evil. They thought they were getting rid of bugs, so to speak, people that didn't agree with them, people that they thought didn't have a right to live, etc., etc. By golly, they're doing something that's okay. The Los Angeles hillside strangler, Angelo Buono, his mom remarried after the death of his father. I mean, hey, perfectly legitimate thing to do, but in Angelo Buono's mind, the mother was a whore, yes? He was doing a cleanup operation. This is evil. He had plotted and schemed how he's going to lure these women into his good graces and then rape, strangle, and kill them. That's evil. I'm interested in personality from one end to the other, in the scale of awfulness of all the things that human beings have done to one another. Is it the most awful, or is it some mid-position?
A scale of evil.
A scale of evil, yes. That has 22 points. My 0 point, when you kill in self-defense, it's not murder, it's homicide. And then I go down step by step, starting with the crime of passion. A person like Jean Harris has her jealousy tweaked by her lover when she discovers that he's cheating on her, and she kills him out of fury. People say, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Of course, hell hath no fury like a man scorned either, because there's plenty of men, believe you me, that kill their women out of jealousy. Then there are those who killed to get somebody out of the way. John Hill, the doctor who was having an affair with some woman and wanted to get rid of his wife, so he injected feces into her veins, killed his wife in that disgusting way. Scheming to hurt another person. Conscious scheming to hurt another person. That's really what evil is. And then you get toward the end point of the scale, serial sexual homicides, what we call serial killing, depravity, things that psychiatrists are not even supposed to talk about because we're supposed to always suspend judgment and everything. But how can you suspend judgment when somebody does something terribly wicked to another person? Like Ian Brady, a serial killer in England, would lure kids, strangle the child, record the screams, then use that tape recording as a kind of sexual turn-on. About as ultimate an evil as you can get. So I use that as my endpoint on my scale. No matter what example you come up with, there's always a worse example. Teresa Knorr, pathologically jealous of her own daughters. They were thin and pretty where she was getting portly. She called them whores and sluts, would lock one girl in a closet, chained to a pipe and not feed her. Finally, she took one daughter out into the very deserted area in California and had her own sons help pour gasoline and burn her alive. Now, there's something about doing that to one's own kin that, to me, is practically off the chart. On the other hand, can I really say that that's worse than Burdella, a homosexual serial killer who built torture setup, in his house where he would lure men that he would have sex with, get them in chained and strapped down positions and subject them to prolonged torture as to who's in first place? It's not an easy decision. It's almost impossible to find somebody that is unequivocally the most awful, particularly because some people might say, yeah, Dr. Stone, that's pretty bad, but I've been struggling with trying to treat a 9-year-old boy whose father would pour boiling water over his son's penis, took a cherry bomb firecracker and blew up his puppy. And so it goes. There seems to be no end, to the possibility of human depravity if you really look into these things. We all have murderous fantasies toward people that, hurt us or bother us. There's a fascination with reading about somebody that actually did something that we've often thought about but could never bring ourselves to do. I've read just shy of 400 full-length biographies of celebrated murderers. That's what got me started. Biographies are very valuable to me because they have lots of detail about their early background, the predisposing factors, and about the personality.
How many true crime books have you read?
There's the serial killers, 104, 105 of them. There's the men who kill their wives, 63 of those. Women that kill repeatedly, one infant after the other, a small number. Of very horrific or heinous kinds of murders, another half dozen. Mass murderers, serial killing, women who marry killers, all this kind of thing. I keep these books, many of which are paperbacks, in the waiting room that my wife uses. She teaches children with reading disabilities. She sometimes gets a little bit exercised, by the lurid titles of some of these books, because these little kids, are looking up there and seeing titles like The True Story of California's Vampire Killer, who tried to drink the blood of these women, thinking that it would cure his impotence. Didn't work. The Man with the Candy, about Dean Corll, a man who lured boys with promises of candy. Deadly Innocence, Paul Bernardo, terrible, torturing person from Toronto. Garden of Graves, the shocking true story of Long Island's serial killer. That's about Joel Rifkin that killed about 17 prostitutes. The Torso Killer, that's Richard Cottingham, the paperback in the regular bookstore. Cut off their heads and hands, The Twisted Life and Crimes of Harvey Gladman, man out in the Hollywood area. Die for Me, the terrifying true story of the Charles Ng, Leonard Lake torture murders. Lure people, kidnap them, and so on, for the sheer pleasure of it. Somebody's husband, somebody's son, the story of the Yorkshire Ripper, thought his wife was a slut or a loose woman or something. All his father's sins, where the bodies are buried. The Torture Doctor, pedophile serial killer, bashed the girl's head, carved out his victim's eyeballs, beheaded his mother, raped, strangled, trapped doors, just hated people, killed a woman, beheaded cats, sodomized, shot his grandparents to death, pit of lie, he killed about half a dozen elderly women. Such a dangerous guy that they built a wire cage, boiled over with hatred, for the whole human race. Cannibals. The phenomenon has been with us for over a century. One of the earliest cases was in Boston in the 1870s or 80s. So each decade, 1880, 1890, 1900, one or two. All of a sudden in the 60s, bingo, tremendous number of serial killing. Not simply because we began to notice, no, this is an absolute increase. And I therefore became intrigued with trying to understand why already.
Why?
Since the 60s, there was the women's liberation movement and feminism, which empowered many women to say no to men that battered them. There was now a whole movement where women said, enough already. And rightly so, but there's a price that comes with things. The serial killers primarily come from the social class of working class men. Men who have a less secure hold on their woman than a man in more comfortable circumstances. Threatened men who are insecure. Psychoanalysis developed as a treatment for inhibited people who didn't feel they had a right to the ordinary pleasures of life, sex and so on. And as a result, there was a change in attitude. Now, many more people who have psychiatric troubles that have to do with impulsivity rather than inhibition.
But doesn't this predate the sexual revolutions of the 60s and the 70s?
No, it doesn't. Because the number of men committing serial sexual homicide before the 60s was very small, a couple a decade, as opposed to dozens and dozens in each of the ensuing decades, hundreds operating at any one time in our country. What is the character of the person? If the person has pretty good character, chances are they're not going to end up being a serial killer or committing torture. Those people have a different makeup than the ones who kill with impunity, kill with pleasure, the psychopath. 20 descriptors. Each of them can be scored 0 if it's not there, 1 if it's there to a little bit, and 2 if it's distinctly there. So the maximum score would be 40. First item, glibness or superficial charm. Second, grandiose sense of self-worth. Third, need for stimulation or proneness to boredom. Fourth, pathological lying. Fifth, conning or being manipulative. Sixth, lack of remorse or guilt, shallow affect, callous or lack of empathy, parasitic lifestyle. 10, poor behavioral controls, promiscuous sexual behavior, early behavioral problems, lack of realistic long-term goals, impulsivity, failure to accept responsibility, many short-term marital relationships, then juvenile delinquency, revocation of conditional release, like failure of parole, and 20, criminal versatility.
Aren't those kinds of things subject to misinterpretation?
Every appraisal that people make are subject to a certain subjectivity. There's going to be a gray zone where some people will give a person a score that's in the psychopathic range, and other people who say, yes, he's glib, but he's not that glib. Yes, he's grandiose, but we don't think he's incredibly grandiose. Callous, but there are even more callous people than he. This is a gray zone, similar, to the boundary line between Paraguay and Argentina when I was growing up. Just a bunch of gray areas saying we don't know where Paraguay leaves off and Argentina begins. I became interested in seeing how one could describe personality in its totality. I began jotting down personality trait words and ended up with about 500 negative words, a little over 100 positive words. Every language has more words for negative traits because they bother people. Think of 30 words that describe honesty. You're honest, it's finished. But you can think of many words that describe dishonest because there's deceitful and there's deceptive and there's cunning, mendacious. So I ended up with this pile of negative words of total vocabulary of personality. If you have 300, 400, 500 words, you pretty much have done the job. Abandoned, which means wild, given to wild impulses. Abrasive, abusive, overly adventurous, contentious, bombastic. Those are some among the 500 words.
Go on.
Competitive, compulsive, domineering, doer, envious, grudge-holding, ineducable, meek, nitpicking, obstreperous, predatory, pedantic, risque, sarcastic, smug, slothful, zany, teasing,
Zany?
Zany.
Why zany?
Well, it starts with a Z. Doing wild, humorous things. It's a special word that's a little bit different from the other words.
What's the worst?
Oh, I don't know. The worst? I never thought about that. I don't think there's any worst among all these. Maybe sadistic would be among the worst.
You have created your own circles of hell.
Yes.
A revision and update of Dante.
Dante had the idea that there were degrees of awfulness, and he ended up with 9 circles of hell. In the bottommost pit, he placed Judas Iscariot, who betrayed Christ. The worst murderer, not so far down, was in the 7th circle, and was a man who killed his uncle in order to accelerate the process of inheritance. Nickel and dime comparison to these sadistic serial killers that were not around at the time of Dante. A millennium before Dante, you get in the time of the decadent Roman emperors, most especially Caligula. Incredibly sadistic, killed for sport, but of course different from these serial killers. That's, so to speak, their main occupation. With Caligula, it was like a pastime, you might say. He was the emperor, after all, and it was just a sideline. Sodomizing women, killing whoever he felt like killing. Roman Emperor syndrome. Imagine that you're stuck on a desert isle. A rabbi on a desert isle, and you have to pick somebody to share your little island with. Using it as a thought experiment, the rabbi can pick one isle mate, Adolf Eichmann or Buford Furo, and the question is, who do you choose? Hey, you pick Eichmann. Naturally, gotta pick Eichmann. Eichmann was an ordinary citizen in his private life, but when he actually had occasion to see the Jews being destroyed in one of these camps, he nearly fainted. He was responsible for setting up the railroad, moving the captured Jews from one part of Europe to another, to Auschwitz and so on. He was a transportation guy. Somebody, who was not a dyed-in-the-wool anti-Semite. Somebody of whom it could literally be said some of my best friends were Jews. The rabbi in this island could have carried on a perfectly pleasant conversation about European history, about train schedules, about all kinds of things. Buford Furo, if you had picked him, you'd be in deep trouble, because he's the guy that had a rabid hatred of Jews, blacks, minorities of every description. Went to shoot up a bunch of Jewish kids at a little kindergarten, managed to kill accidentally a Christian postal worker just because his aim was bad. Left alone on the desert isle with Buford Furo, you would not have lasted out the hour. Totally unrepentant killer. Furo was evil from the get-go. Eichmann, on the other hand, was somebody who began to carry out acts which he never would have conceived of had Hitler not been the leader in Germany, and had there not been war. Eichmann never killed anybody personally. He committed evil on a grand scale, but was not a thoroughly evil person all the time. He did not take a pistol out and shoot anybody. Hitler, as far as we know, didn't either. I was thinking about treatments. Therapy. Zone 6, beyond treatment, period. Zone 5, beyond treatment, but under special circumstances with a special therapist, special treatment method, special lucky circumstance, special medication, could actually end up appropriately socialized. You see that with certain pedophiles, for example. There are pedophiles who kill zone 6 beyond treatment, and there are a small number of pedophiles who have remorse, character qualities that allow them to take the medication faithfully, not leave the medicine in the drawer or fail to come for their appointment. Pedophiles of that sort are essentially treatable. Zone 4, tough to treat. Zone 3 for people with mild degrees of toughness. Zone 2, mild shoplifting, abrasive employees that rub people the wrong way because of their arrogance, or they step ahead of other people in the lunch line, but they don't require major psychological surgery. And Zone 1 for average folk, who live harmoniously with others and don't need help altogether, where I hope the majority of us live. Zone 6, contempt for the whole idea that there's anything wrong with them, contempt for psychiatry. If you force them into treatment, you may, paradoxically, aggravate the situation so that their relapse rate, if they're in an institution, is greater than if they hadn't been treated. Why? Because they learn the tricks. They learn what to say. They learn how to con the authorities. Interesting example that comes immediately to mind of Gary Taylor shooting women with BB guns and this kind of thing. Very bad character. Absolutely, I learned my lessons. I know alcohol is bad for me, no question. I give you my promise on Scout's honor, all this kind of thing. Got released, began drinking again, and now became a serial killer, torture chamber with locked door in the basement of his house, raped women, and then buried them in the backyard. Zone 6 par excellence. Is therapy of whatever sort likely to be effective? And at what point is a person on the other side of that line?
The Zone 6 line, people that cannot be redeemed.
Yes.
Where redemption is an important part of this idea.
Yes, it is.
Can you also diagnose literary figures?
Yes. Hamlet, narcissist.
Macbeth.
Overly ambitious, narcissistic, influenced by this very self-centered and scheming wife of his. He did the evil act, but it was not quite so evil thoroughly as Lady Macbeth.
Her diagnosis?
Power-hungry narcissist.
Zone 6?
Yeah, I don't think she would be amenable to treatment.
Zone 6?
I think so, yes.
What made you so curious about violent murder, serial killing, mass murder?
I've often wondered that. When I was in private school, back when I was around 10 years old, some kids who were way older bullied me a lot because I had better grades than they had. My rescuer was the oldest of the group, Elmer Wainwright, who was 17 and a Golden Gloves champion. I was so much littler than Elmer that, there was no prize for Elmer to beat up on me. He really took pity on me. He would beat up any guy that picked on me. I would do his homework. As I told him, if you copy my homework the same, we'll both get A's and the teacher will wonder how come you're suddenly getting A's. So I'll make here a mistake, there a mistake, a little extra mistake, so you'll end up with a B, and they'll think it's legitimate. Elmer got through his courses with a respectable grade, and the bully stopped bullying me. In the interest of survival, I felt that it was okay. Being throttled, beaten, it was not pleasant. That may have contributed to my, fascination, with violence.
Somehow I can't imagine it just has to do with being around bullies. You are a mystery to yourself.
I have to think about that. The fact that nothing comes immediately to mind means I don't find myself so mysterious very often. Why did I develop an interest in drastic aspects of human nature? That's somewhat mysterious.
Really mysterious?
A little bit mysterious. It's very difficult for each of us to know himself thoroughly. Polonius gave that advice to Hamlet. Some people have reasonably accurate conception of their personality. Other people are remarkably ignorant about how others see them. But